Okay, welcome to, I guess, our first little online sort of lecture setup and arrangement, and we're here to talk about the ATP PC energy system. Now, the ATP PC energy system is our first energy system that we'll be looking at in any great sort of detail. Of course, we've got a couple of other energy systems that we'll look at later in the year. We're looking at also anaerobic glycolysis, aerobic glycolysis, and to a small extent, aerobic lipolysis. But firstly, the ATP CP system. Easily our most powerful energy system and the energy system that we prefer to use for high intensity, short duration efforts. So if I look here at our notes, we've got a couple of points that we should be making sure that we take really careful consideration of. Firstly, it's an anaerobic energy system, which means it doesn't rely upon there being enough oxygen present. And when we talk about events that are short duration and high intensity, and ideally you should be starting to think about the events in your mind that would best suit being used or being supplied by the ATP PC energy system, and you should be thinking about things like a 100-metre sprint, any type of field event in athletics such as a high jump, a shot put, a long jump, because if you think about it, in all of those events, the person is trying to do the best of their ability, the most powerful execution of that activity, while still making sure they stick to the technical aspects and the technique aspects, but they're still trying to do it as best as they possibly can. So they're exerting as much force and all those sorts of things as possible. So that means they need to provide energy very rapidly. And now to provide energy rapidly, given that we only have a couple of seconds of ATP stored in our muscles, it means that that ATP that's broken down to provide the energy for muscular contraction must be resynthesized very quickly. And this is where this system comes into its own. It's very much the most powerful of our energy systems in regards to that magical word rate. That is, it can provide energy for ATP resynthesis very quickly. Now, it provides this energy through the breakdown of creatine phosphate. So if I scroll down here to our little diagram, we can see that creatine phosphate, let me get my things organised, creatine phosphate here gets broken down, oh, I'm moving the whole thing, gets broken down and it's split, and so creatine phosphate is no longer. All right, so it's broken down and it becomes useless to us. But that breaking down or that splitting of creatine phosphate releases energy, which is signified here. And that release of energy provides energy for ADP plus that phosphate molecule to be resynthesized and rebuilt back into ATP, ready to be broken down yet again for energy for muscular contraction. Now, if the ADP has not been resynthesized, we have to slow down, or we can't contract our muscles as intensely or as forcefully. And so that sees us, obviously, our performance diminishing. So if you think about yourself playing in a sports match or any sort of team sport, hopefully you can associate that type of feeling where initially in the game or in your first effort, you're full of energy, you can run really fast. But then as the game progresses, or even if you have to put in a second effort very soon after your first effort, we feel fatigue. We talk about, you hear commentators talking about that all the time in AFL football about first efforts and second efforts. So obviously when it comes to second efforts and third efforts, the athlete might be running short of creatine phosphate to break down to provide energy for ATP resynthesis. Therefore the athlete is unable to move as quickly, and so they're going to be left behind by their opponent. If we go back to here, we can see that it's got a limitation. Where's my cursor gone? We can see we've got a limitation when it comes to our ATP CP system or PC system. It can only last for about 8 to 10 seconds. All right, so that's a combination of stored ATP that's in the muscle plus the energy that creatine phosphate or the breakdown of creatine phosphate can provide. Creates an energy combination of about 8 to 10 seconds. Now that means the rate is very high because we know it can resynthesize ATP very quickly because the creatine phosphate's sitting in the muscle waiting ready to go, as is the ATP that's stored. But it doesn't have a very high yield because it can only last that 8 to 10 seconds. Now, ATP PC stored at the muscle for immediate energy release, and this is what enhances its rate and why the rate is so high. And if we just have a look here, we can see right down the bottom here that once phosphocreatine has been depleted, the muscle ATP must be resynthesized from another substance. This is typically glycogen, and it's typically glycogen broken down anaerobically, so again, without the presence of oxygen. Now, if we have a look here at this little video, which I've loaded up hopefully and will work nicely for us, here we've got some bloke who's going to go about deadlifting a car. Now, as the video progresses, we'll see him deadlift the car some 20 times. Now, I want you to be stopping here and thinking about what energy system he would be using to deadlift a car. Now ideally you're thinking, well, it's a forceful contraction, you can tell by the strain on his face that he's working really hard, so it's definitely ATP CP that's providing the energy for ATP resynthesis. Now as he progresses, you can see he takes a small rest in between each lift. Now that small rest might be just sufficient for him to replenish some of his phosphocreatine stores. Certainly not all of them, because that'll take 3 to 5 minutes rest. But there is some replenishment going on, which allows his ATP CP system to last a little bit longer than 8 to 10 seconds, because that's 8 to 10 seconds of continuous activity. Instead, we can see though now that his speed of contraction is starting to slow down. We can see that there's more strain on his face. We can see he's taking longer rests in between his lifts. Now what's going on here clearly is that the energy system that is dominant is probably no longer his ATP CP energy system. Instead, the dominant energy provider is the anaerobic glycolytic system. Now it can't provide energy as quickly for ATP resynthesis, and that explains why his contraction speed, or the speed at which he was lifting the car, slows down. And it also explains why for all of us, when we're involved in activities that are high intensity, short duration, we can't do them for very long before we start to get tired, because we're simply moving from one energy system, the ATP PC system, being the dominant provider, to anaerobic glycolysis becoming the dominant energy provider. And that sees us start to create byproducts using that system which aren't very beneficial to our performance. But before we even get to that point, we're looking at the fact that it just can't provide energy for ATP resynthesis as quickly, and therefore our performance has to suffer in regards to either force production or the rate of muscular contraction. So that, in layman's terms, that means if we can't produce the energy quickly, we can't move or run as quickly. Simple as that. And just to finish off, we should be remembering that this anaerobic system is really beneficial for us, particularly at the start of exercise, because from our previous unit of study we would remember that it takes a significant amount of time for our ventilation and our cardiac output to catch up to the necessary levels to provide the right amount of oxygen for exercise. So therefore, to have an energy system that can provide lots of energy without oxygen being present is incredibly beneficial. And the smart ones of you in this group will realise that exercise at that intensity doesn't actually utilise, goes at an intensity level that's so great that oxygen will never be provided in the right amount to satisfy the muscles. So we're talking here at an exercise beyond our VO2 maximum. So that generally lies somewhere around about 85% of our maximum heart rate. Anything above that sort of intensity, you're going to see the bulk of energy provided by the anaerobic systems, whether that be anaerobic glycolysis or ATP CP, depends on a number of factors that we've talked about already, such as the duration of the event, the intensity of the event, the prevalence of those fuels being present in the muscle already. You know, we may have already exhausted our creatine phosphate stores, which means, well, we can't use them if they're not there. Simple as that. So hopefully that gives us a really good insight as to what the ATP CP system is all about. And look, I look forward to getting your feedback on this in the coming days. Catch you soon. Bye-bye.